Firstly, I would like to thank you, the whole DevSecOps team for putting together this really, really awesome event and for giving me the opportunity to present, what I've put together for this conference. So my talk is based on how to build your first DevSecOps pipeline. So let's dive into it. A little bit about myself. My name is Karan. I'm the founder of WiseFox Security. So this company focuses on, providing services in offensive security and DevSecOps consulting. I've done a few certifications, as you can see, and my passion is web mobile pen testing and doing DevSecOps and introducing tools into the CI/CD pipelines. You can follow me on Twitter if you like. I do have a YouTube channel as well that you can see here. I do post content here and there. So if you like, DevSecOps or pen testing related videos, please subscribe my channel. That's me. So the agenda for today. So what I want to do is I want to take you through, with some of the foundations of DevSecOps stuff, like what DevSecOps is, why DevSecOps is important. We will look at some of the DevSecOps buzzwords. We will look at, a functioning CI/CD pipeline. And then we will compare what a traditional security approach looks like versus how the shift left approach actually looks like. And then I'm going to give you a practical walkthrough of a working pipeline. And that pipeline is based on GitLab. And within that pipeline, I've created various stages, and we have introduced different sort of toolings, security tooling at each of the stage of that pipeline to detect our security issues as early as possibly we can. With this, we will look at, our first thing first, what is DevSecOps? Well, everybody sort of knows what DevSecOps is. DevSecOps stands for Development, Security, and Operations. So usually, with DevSecOps, what we're trying to do is we're trying to introduce our security controls in every stage of the software delivery. So for example, if you have a pipeline, right, you've got to build, test, integrate, deploy, and then monitor sort of stage. We want to introduce our security tooling within those pipeline stages. So at least we can detect some of the security issues as early as possible, right? With the help of DevSecOps, we also try to shift the security to the left. And with that, what happens is we are part of the development stage. So we are part of like each of the stage that developers gonna hit in that CI/CD pipeline, and the security that we, as a security professionals, the value that we're adding to the team is not just on the far right, but it is also as part of each and every stage. So as a DevSecOps consultant or an engineer, we are integral part of that whole CI/CD pipeline, not just looking at some of the security issues when the artifact is actually deployed in the production environment. So in this diagram, as I was talking about, how you have different sort of stages, you can see we've got plan and develop, we commit the code, we do some building of the code, we test code, and then if all is fine, we deploy that to production, and then our operate sort of stage kicks in. But if you see underneath these stages, we have so many different security activities that we can introduce. And with the help of these security activities, we are introducing security controls as we are developing our software. We will look at each and every one of these security activities in upcoming slides, and what can we introduce, maybe mainly from open source perspective before we go through any commercial offerings. So let's look at now why DevSecOps is important, right? So we looked in the previous slide what DevSecOps is, but now the question comes, why do we need to do DevSecOps? I answered this, in the previous slide a little bit, but the whole purpose of doing DevSecOps is that we want to identify security issues as early as possible in our CI/CD pipelines or in our software delivery, software deployment. So with the help of DevSecOps, what we are trying to do is we're trying to shift the mindset of our development teams. We are trying to, provide them with the security mindset as early as possible. So even the developers and the people who are developing your product, they are thinking about security, and it's not something that is thought after you have developed everything and now you're ready to go to production. So security is your integral part when you're developing stuff. So that's also an importance of your DevSecOps. Part of DevSecOps initiatives, you can run programs like security champions. You're providing training to people who are passionate about security as part of your organization, and then they become the security advocates of your DevSecOps journey. And these security advocates will help you shift that mentality that security is something that we have to build into our design. Security is something that we have to build at each and every step of the way. So that's going to really help shift that mentality. Also, with the help of DevSecOps, you can provide that you have that assurance that look, we have done some level of security testing in each and every stage of our software development. Therefore, you are not just relying on like a single pen test end of the day that may or may not happen when you deploy your artifact in production. So moving on to the next phase of our DevSecOps journey, we're going to look at some of the buzzwords. People who probably just starting their journey, maybe as a security engineers in this DevSecOps space. We're going to look at some of the buzzwords that we probably hear every time you're probably having that conversation with your security engineers or security consultants. So the first thing first that you hear is SAST. So what is SAST? Well, SAST stands for Static Application Security Testing. Now, in simpler terms, SAST helps you identify security issues in your source code. So this means if you have a source code written in Java, like you have some source code files, repository where you're storing your source code, you can run a SAST tool to identify security issues. So your typical SAST tools will identify issues such as, you're not sanitizing your input correctly. So those issues may lead to cross-site scripting, SQL injections, SSRF vulnerabilities, and whatnot, right? So those are like your typical issues that you're going to detect with SAST. Now, you also need to keep in mind that when you're running a SAST tool, your application is not running. All you have is a code base, and you're just pointing and shooting your SAST tool at your source code. So therefore, your vulnerability is going to look very different when you run the next tool, which is DAST. Some of the examples of your SAST tools are SonarQube. Snyk offers really, really good offerings in the SAST space. You've got Veracode, you've got HP Fortify, and so many other vendors who offer similar sort of tooling. Then we move on to the next buzzword that we hear is DAST. Now, DAST stands for Dynamic Application Security Testing. Now, if with the help of this tooling, what we are trying to do is we're trying to find vulnerabilities in a running web application. Also, not just web applications, but also APIs. So what we are doing is we are pointing our tool to an application URL or to an API endpoint, and we are trying to identify vulnerabilities. We will look at in the later stage of our presentation that how are we integrated OWASP ZAP to identify security vulnerabilities in our web application. Now, you have to keep this in mind that in DAST, your application is in running state. So your findings or your security findings with DAST are going to vary from what you would identify from SAST. Now, again, you have various vendors who offer DAST tooling. You've got AppScan, you've got Checkmarks, again, you've got Burp Suite, you've got Stackhawk, and so many other vendors who offer similar sort of tooling. The next two buzzwords that probably making more and more noise in the last couple of years. The first one is RASP, which stands for Runtime Application Self-Protection. Now you keep it with RASP, if you're not aware of what it is, treat it as this is type of preventative and a very like a sort of like a protective measure that you have within your application. So what you do is you deploy an agent on your web application server, and with the help of RASP, what it does is it analyzes your application. And whenever your application is under attack, like say if an attacker is trying to do a SQL injection, or like trying to exploit a vulnerability that they may have found in your application, with the help of RASP, you could actually protect against those sort of vulnerabilities in real time. So it provides you protection against those attacks in real time. Some people do confuse RASP with WAF, which is Web Application Firewall, but this sort of play kind of similar, but still a little bit different in few ways. So you've got few vendors who offer these sort of toolings as well. You've got Imperva, you've got Signal Sciences, you've got Contrast Protect, and also there are other vendors as well. And the next buzzword that we hear is interactive application security testing. Now, with the interactive application security testing, what we're trying to do is, so we take all the pros of SAST and DAST and we combine them together to get more comprehensive analysis of your application's security posture. With IAST, or interactive application security testing, you deploy an agent on the web application server, and what it does is it analyzes how much a coverage does your security tests have, or what's the coverage looks like across your source code when you're performing different type of testing. And with the help of IAST, we can ensure that we cover all of our code base, and then it will also help us analyze our application security posture more thoroughly. And again, you've got some vendors offering this, as you can see. I know I'm talking a lot, but we'll look at some of the demos in upcoming slides. Next thing that we're going to look at is SCA, or software composition analysis. We're looking at, with the help of software composition analysis, we are trying to find vulnerabilities in our applications dependencies. Now, these days, your code base relies on so many different dependencies, libraries, and the SCA tooling is super important when you're developing and building your software. So you've got various vendors who offer these type of toolings. You've got GitHub Dependabot, again, you've got Sneak, you've got Veracode, Retire.js, Safety. There are a number of other open source alternatives as well. Last but not least, we've got the typical DevOps these days who are in DevOps space. They know what infrastructure as code is. Now, this is again the way of managing your infrastructure and its deployment with the help of code. So everything you do, you don't have to do clicking through the console. All you're doing is you're writing your code, and with the help of that code and the configuration, you're deploying your infrastructure. So everything that you're deploying is controlled through code. That's why it is called infrastructure as code. You've got some big players in this, like you've got Terraform, which is platform agnostic. Then you've got AWS CloudFormation. You've got Ansible, Chef, Puppet, and few others. Now, we've covered these buzzwords, and we're going to look at some of the traditional security processes. So this is going to look at how we approach security, like when you don't have DevSecOps model in your organization. So let's look at what we've got here, right? So these are your different stages of a pipeline, as you can see. Um, you do, say you, for example, you've deployed something in production. Now it is accessible, it's available to everyone. Now you get a pen test done maybe after 6 months, or even before you go live, you get a pen test done. And in that pen test, they have found a SQL injection in your web application. Now, since they have found a SQL injection in your web application and you know that this is a critical vulnerability, you have to fix this, right? Now, again, that finding needs to make all the way back to your development stage. That finding needs to be shown to the developers. That finding needs to be triaged, needs to be shown to the developers. Now, developers have to think about fixes, right? As you can see, we developed stuff, we deployed it. Again, we found a vulnerability. Now we're coming back to the same sort of stage again where we started, and now we are again writing code to fix the vulnerability. Now, you can imagine how much time it takes, firstly, to develop something, to deploy, then getting a pen test done. Again, you're finding issues, and you're getting security issues that you identified. You have to fix them. Look at that whole cycle. Could take you easily a couple of months before you would actually fix that SQL injection in your production environment. Now we're going to look at what if you have a DevSecOps model or some sort of tooling embedded into your CI/CD pipelines. Here, we're going to look at the shift left approach. Here, what we have done is same thing, but while you're developing your product or your software, you have introduced a source code review. That could be a typical SAST tooling that you have integrated in your build stage, for example. With the help of that SAST tool, you've picked up that SQL injection here, right? You didn't have to wait for that pen test to detect this issue. You have detected this issue in an automated fashion um, as part of your build stage, and that particular issue is fed back to the development to the developers who were writing this code, probably in real time, right? And you can imagine how quickly you identified this versus when you were waiting for a pen test or some sort of other security testing to happen end of the day. So here you have also reduced your development cycle. You didn't have to wait longer, and that particular vulnerability didn't have to go all the way to production for someone to exploit. So you can see the value of introducing some sort of automation, some sort of security tooling as part of your pipeline. Now, in this diagram, now this is not just limited to a SAST tooling, right? You can see each and every stage that I've sort of tried to showcase here with the help of this diagram. You can introduce number of security activities for each and every stage. You can kick off any sort of story with threat modeling. Then you can have SAST being done against your code base. Then you can look at secret scanning. You can use Trufflehog. You can use any other open source based scanner who can identify security vulnerabilities or secrets in your code base. You can have software composition analysis tooling that can pick up on your third-party libraries, outdated libraries. As you can see, each and every stage and every step on the way has some sort of tooling embedded into that pipeline. So what that's going to do, no matter how many releases you are doing every week, you have some security assurance. Typical organizations these days have at least 10 to 20 releases per week. And you can imagine you're not getting any security testing done if you're not using any of these tools, or you don't have any security automation. You're just waiting on a pen test or to be done maybe 6 months or 12 months down the line. But look at the gap between your releases and when you get a pen test done. What happens in between is that your security? So that's your security posture. That's your security risk right there. So you probably have to look at what can you pick and choose and can introduce in your CI/CD pipelines. You don't have to do all of this, but at least you can maybe pick and choose some of these tools that you can introduce in your as part of your software development. Um, I've built this, so I've built a lab which is free of cost, and I want to share this with you, that you can also build yourself, to maybe test your tools, maybe to test your CI/CD pipelines that have some security tooling in them. So what I've done is I've got my host machine, my laptop. From my laptop, I've got a free account on GitLab, and then from Git, like on my host machine, I've created two VMs. One VM is called the GitLab runner, and the other VM is my deployment server. So for this purpose of this presentation, I've got a vulnerable a Python application which will be deployed to my deployment server, and then I will be running number of security tools against it, and I will showcase that to you in my pipeline. So here you can see, you might be wondering, what is GitLab Runner and why did I have to run that in a virtual machine? So GitLab Runner takes all the jobs that you create, or as part of your GitLab deployment. So you can run those jobs on GitLab Runners. Now, GitLab Runner can be self-hosted, like you can host them yourself, or you can use the cloud version of GitLab Runner that will be running on GitLab. I just chose to use my own because it was free. So that's why the whole setup is free of cost. And then I've got another VM which is running Linux, where I will be deploying my application. Now, in your typical, or like, in a bigger scale, you might have, you can replace that deployment server with an EC2 instance on AWS, or it could be an EKS. You might be deploying on an EKS cluster and whatnot. But in this little lab, I've just got a virtual machine that I've created. Um, so this is what my pipeline looks like. I've got a build, test, release, deploy, and integration stage. Each of the stage has security tooling embedded in. So I've got a software composition analysis, two of them. I've got retire.js, I've got safety, I've got a SAST tool, which is specifically for the Python language to find vulnerabilities in the code base. That is there. I've got a truffle hog, which is there to detect secrets. If I'm leaving any secrets behind in my source code, it can help detect that. Once all of that is done, what I'm doing is I'm building a Docker image, and I'm uploading that Docker image to Docker Hub. And once it is uploaded to Docker Hub, I'm using Sneak to scan that Docker image for vulnerabilities. Once I'm satisfied with that, I am pulling that Docker image down and deploying that Docker image to my deployment server that I was showing you in the previous slide. So that deployment would run my vulnerable application that is written in Python, and then that becomes available on this URL. Now, if you paid attention to that DAST buzzword I talked about, now the application is in running state. I can point my DAST tools to it. Like, for example, I'm using OWASP Zap. I'm using Nikto, which is again open source. And just for the sake of it, I'm running Nmap against that IP address to see what ports are open. So this is at a high level what my pipeline looks like. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you that working pipeline in GitLab. So let me just probably that's what you guys are thinking, but let me share my screen where I've got that GitLab logged in. So 1 second, please. There we go. Please let me know if you can see my other screen. Cool. Awesome. So now we are logged into GitLab, and in GitLab, I'm hosting my vulnerable Python application, right? And if you've never used GitLab, please keep in mind this particular file plays an important role in GitLab. So gitlab-ci.yaml. So if I go inside this file, this is where I have defined each and every stage that I showcased you what that my pipeline looks like. So you can see build, test, release, deploy, and integration. So these are my 5 stages of the pipeline. And as part of that, I have introduced these security tools. I am doing a software composition analysis with Retire.js. I am doing same thing, but with another tool called Safety. And then I'm running Bandit, which is going to find security issues in the Python code base with the SAST tooling. Then I'm using Trufflehawk for secret scanning. Then I'm releasing that particular Docker image to Docker Hub. After that, I'm deploying that Docker image to my deployment server that you can see here. Now, for example, if you have a different, because in this example I am only deploying it to my server, but in your case you might be deploying it to AWS, with the help of infrastructure as code or something like that. But the concept is still the same. Then once it is deployed, I'm running my tool like Zap. I'm running, for example, Nikto, and I'm running Nmap scan, right? So this is at a high level what this whole pipeline is going to do. Now, one more thing, I think this is probably a little takeaway. This flag here says allow failure is equal to true. Now, what that means is, that means even if my tool is identifying security vulnerabilities, I don't want my pipelines to fail. I want the pipeline to proceed to the next stage. That means we are not holding on, we are not failing pipeline, and we are stopping teams from delivering their software to production. You may need to leave that flag there if you are not mature in your DevSecOps journey. As you're maturing, you might want to then start removing this flag, which means if a tool detects any security issue, I want to fail the pipeline until we fix that security issue, and then you would move on to the next stage, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to click here, and it's going to show you a very nice sort of graph here that how our pipeline looks like. And I'm going to show you quickly, if I go inside the SAST bandit, here you can see the security issues detected by the SAST tool. Now, look, I didn't have to wait for a pen test. I didn't have to wait for a third party to tell me that there is a SQL injection, for example, here. Even though this is false positive, still, it picked it up. As a security engineer, you would help triage that issue. But I didn't have to wait for this feedback. I didn't have to wait for this vulnerability to be identified. Another thing, this SaaS tool picked up that I have a hard-coded password in my code base. This is a true positive finding. There is a hard-coded password. Now you can take this issue, you can tell your developers, please use secure mechanisms for storing your credentials. Hard coding password is not the way in your source code. So similarly, we can go back and we can maybe look at some of the results for Zap. What did Zap identified? So Zap identified a number of vulnerabilities, but it also told us how many of the checks passed and how many of the issues it has identified. Like, it found some vulnerable JavaScript libraries. It found that HTTP only flag is not set. People who know, why do we need this? Well, this will help you protect your cookie against, for example, against XSS attacks, right? So nobody would be able to read your cookie if you've got that flag set. So you can see there are lots of issues that Zap identified. The beauty of these tools is tools are like, you could tweak these configurations, and you can find lots of more granular level stuff. And then again, then you have very, very really good offerings commercially, which can provide you like same sort of stuff, but more true positive findings, maybe can provide you more advanced type of API scanning and stuff like that. So Similarly, we can maybe, if you like, we can look at what Nmap found. So we ran an Nmap scan, and it found uh, 2 open ports against my deployment server. So yeah, again, it's easy. It's all tools that you're seeing in this pipeline. They're all open source. I haven't paid for anything, but this is still identifying security vulnerabilities. Again, just want to give you a quick tip that if you are on your DevSecOps journey, you do not have to start with commercial tooling. You can look at some open source alternative for proof of concept, and then you can go ahead and you can start investing in more of your commercial tooling. But for now, that's all from me.